Could this be the moment where Washington begins to publicly pressure Israel after the ultimate American support to Israel since the war started?
Thank you for having me, Mona. Greetings to you, your audience, and to the dear guest. I think at last, major powers or some major powers in the West, 17 EU countries, the United Kingdom, Canada, have had an awakening. 53,000 Palestinians later, Palestinian civilians, dead Palestinian civilians later, they have decided at last that some action needs to be taken. And if sanctions are actually applied against or imposed against Israel, this will indeed have an effect on the ground and will be a tool of pressure on Israel. But with that said, without significant US pressure on Israel, nothing changes on the ground. The only person, the only country or party that can actually impose actual pressure on Israel and influence its decision-making directly and effectively is the United States. And that brings me to your question. Will we witness a profound change in US policy towards Israel with regards to Palestine? I don't think so. I don't think that we will ever witness this in our lifetimes. There is an integral, an organic connection of interests between the United States and Israel. It will be rather foolish to assume that Israel is doing its own bidding without any consultation with the United States. It would also be quite naive to assume that anything Israel does is done against the wishes of the United States. There might be some tensions between Netanyahu and Trump with regard to certain issues like Iran, with regards to certain details like the prioritization of the release of. However, the United States never said that it supports a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. It never called upon Israel to withdraw from Gaza. It never abandoned its own calls for the so-called voluntary migration of Gazans, which is basically the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Gaza to other countries. And they are actively doing that. And even with the idea of the entry of aid, they pressured Israel in order to allow aid into the Gaza Strip. However, as you have just mentioned, this so-called Gaza Foundation, humanitarian foundation, is sponsored by the United States. And it will take over the aid distribution in the Gaza Strip from those responsibilities from the UN. And four spots will be designated for the aid distribution under the auspices of US companies sent by the US government under the protection of Israeli soldiers. 3 points in the Murash corridor and 1 point in the Netzarim corridor in order to ensure that anyone who seeks aid will have to move southwards to central and southern Gaza as the Israeli plans dictate. Anything, the United States is facilitating Israeli operations on the ground. Just today, Netanyahu has withdrawn his negotiating team, his entire negotiating team from Doha. It doesn't seem that the United States is actually applying any pressure, real pressure. A few days ago, military cargo planes from a US base in the Middle East landed inside Israel, supplying Israel with more ammunition and more weapons in order to resume their genocide in Gaza. So therefore, any talk about a profound change in the US position is rather absurd and wishful thinking and a misinterpretation of minor disagreements between Israel and the United States.